Okay, we're going to go over a slideshow called communication models. All right, so let's get started. Okay, basic idea of communication models. It's gone back to a long time ago, 300 BC. We've had these theories that have been developed in an attempt to explain and understand how we can improve communication and rhetoric. And if you've had any kind of AP courses in English, you kind of understand rhetorical devices and like how those devices affect communication. So as time has passed, we've developed more and more complex models to try to explain how communication happens and how everyone, arranges that and feeds into those communication models. Okay, basically a communication model is grouped into one of three main categories or three main models. So these are the three categories. We have linear models, interactive models, and transactional models. Now, within that group of those three, there are 8 that falls under that. So there's basically been, these are the three groups, but there's basically 8 models of communication that fall into these three. So the linear model is first. This model was developed by Aristotle, who was a philosopher. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. But his communication model looked like this. You had a speaker, you had what you were saying, you had an audience or a receiver, and then there was an effect afterwards. So if the speaker's like, "You're ugly," the speaker's like somebody saying it, the speech is, "You're ugly," the audience is whoever you're saying it to, and the effect is, I don't know, somebody crying or somebody slugging you, I don't know, but that's the effect. So that's Aristotle's model of communication. Okay, this is Aristotle. So the idea of Aristotle's mode of communication or model of communication is the oldest. It goes all the way back to 300 BC. And this model was designed to examine how to become a better and more convincing communicator. Being a philosopher, he wanted to explore the idea of how you could convince and communicate people with people. So Aristotle argued that we have to look at 5 different elements of communication in order to analyze how the best way is to get our message across. Okay, and that is speaker, speech, occasion, target audience, and effect. He also identified 3 elements of rhetoric, which you'll probably recognize from an English class, and they're right here, which is ethos, which has to do with a speaker's credibility, pathos, which is the ability to connect to a person or an emotional appeal, logos, which is a logical argument or something that is like statistical or factual. And those 3 elements, if you kind of look at them and feed them into your speech, those 3 elements can help you communicate with people. And you're going to have to decide on the occasion and the audience as to which one of those appeals work the best. Okay, Aristotle's model of communication has nothing to do with the role of feedback. And that's why it has changed so much, because we've done so much with feedback in the role of communication. Okay, this is just another kind of visual so you can get the idea. You've got the speaker who's the storyteller there. You've got the speech, which is the story. And of course, this can be just anything said or anything communicated. And then you've got the audience there. And you don't see the effect there because the feedback doesn't come back. But this is the basic idea of Aristotle's method of communication or model of communication. Okay, the next one is another linear model, and this one's called Laswell's model. And this is a visual here. And you can see the model of communication here is the who is the communicator, the says what is the message, the channel is the medium through which the message goes, who it goes to is the receiver, and then of course the effect. Okay, so with Laswell's model of communication, we try to understand the communication event by asking 5 questions. And the questions are, who created the message and was there bias there? Was there any kind of bias in that message? What they actually said, the channel through which it was said, so blog, TV, radio, text message, phone call, verbal communication, that's the channel. Who they said it to and what effect it had on the audience. So this model is effective as it provides a really simple method of critiquing a message and like looking into what the important elements are. And that helps to explain the event under analysis. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. This is another visual of that. Okay, the next one, the third linear model, is Shannon-Weaver model, the Shannon-Weaver model. And this one, if you look at the visual here, it has a little bit something different. It has the noise in there and the encode and decode. The Shannon-Weaver model sees communication occurring in 5 key parts, and those are the sender, the encoder, the channel, the decoder, and the receiver. Now, it emphasizes the importance of encoding and decoding messages for them to be sent. Now, those kind of things, excuse me, grabbing a water, hold on. Okay, these kind of things, the encoding and the decoding, that has to do with like what we put into it, how we decide to send that message, how we encode it as like the tone we put it in, the channel we put it in, and the decoding is like kind of breaking it down and deciding what that meant. During the process of encoding, the sending and decoding, this thing called noise occurs. Now it can be literal. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And it can disrupt or cloud a message. In the most basic and traditional sense, that if you're listening to the radio, it could be static. It could be a breakdown on the internet where you can't get the message. It could be mishearing a conversation, or like you get an email and there's been a misspelling on it, like an auto correct or something, and that could be noise. So it can be actual noise, or it could be just something that gets in the way of you getting that message. So this model was the first to introduce the role of noise in the communication process, because we have to really think about, like, does the receiver actually get the right message if there's noise involved in that? If something interrupts that message or you interpret it wrong, which is the decoding process, then it's important that we consider that whole decoding and that noise. Okay, so the idea of feedback was retroactively introduced to this model. So like after the model kind of came about, they went back and put the idea of feedback in there. Now, feedback's what we send back to the original communicator. It's going to make it more clear when you do the Quizlet. Okay, so this looks a little complicated, but if we look at it, we've got the blue guy here who is the actual sender, and he decides on his message, and he's going to encode that message, decide how he's going to send it. So he's going to decide that he's going to send it by text. So, and he's going to use like all caps and like no punctuation. No, he's going to do punctuation, because punctuation means you're angry, I think in teenage talk. I'm not sure. Okay, so he's going to do that. Now, the noise might occur because maybe he's sending to somebody who thinks punctuation is perfectly okay, and it gets in the way of that. Or maybe the signal is different and it doesn't go through. So when the person over there in the red, the receiver, is trying to decode that message, they're looking at it going, oh, great punctuation. That's so smart. They must be a really smart person, and not getting the idea that it's supposed to be meaning something else. So I hope you guys understood that example, because from what I understand, like punctuation in text messages means something to teenagers. So I don't know. Okay, and the channel there would be the text message itself, the phone, the idea of the text. All right, then you have that receiver who is going to send a message back. So you see that in the red right here, okay? So they're going to send the message, and they're going to go back here and encode their own message. So maybe they write a really short all caps, also, with some kind of emoji in there, and they want to express how they feel about that. So they encode that, send it back. It may go through just fine. There might be also that noise in there, which could be a miscommunication. It could be that the person over here doesn't understand the text the way that they meant it, and then they decode it. And that has to do with like that feedback loop. We call that a feedback loop. So it goes through here, and then this person, once they get the message, they respond, and it goes back here. Okay? And that's the Shannon-Weaver model. All right, now the last linear model is the Berlow's SMCR, which stands for Source Message Channel Receiver. Okay, and that one, I've got a visual here. It has to do with like the subcategories of each one of the categories, the S, the M, the C, and the R. So like things that you need to think about with the source. with the message, with the channel, with the receiver. Okay, so looking at this, it explains it in 4 different steps. So the source, the message, the channel, and the receiver. The unique part about the Berlo model is that it gives that detailed account of each of those key elements, each of those categories, and how that affects communication. So if we're looking at a source, a person who's speaking, you got to think about what kind of skills they have at communicating. You have to think about their culture. You have to think about their attitude, their values, that sort of thing. The message could include the content of the message, the structure, the code of the message, those kind of things. The channel itself has to do with the elements of sense, like hearing. Can you hear it? Can you see it? Was there touching it? Do you smell something? Like that's the channel. Like what else is in there? Receiver includes that person that's getting the message, their attitude, their knowledge, their culture. Is there miscommunication there because of something there? Okay, now we have, I think it's 2 interactive models. The first one is the Osgood-Schramm model, and that model has to do a lot with the decoding and the encoding, the interpreting. Okay, so this one explores information or explores the idea that the sender and the receiver are equal in the communication process, that it's not all based on the sender, that it is just as important to have that receiver and have that feedback. They're both equal in the communication process. Doesn't matter who starts first, they're both equal. So the sender sends out the message, the receiver gets the message, sends another one back. They're both equal. Because if one of those doesn't work, the communication model, like the communication broke down. So this model is best for explaining and examining personal, like in person, like in real time communication where the feedback happens right at that point in time, like it's immediate. So if you're having a discussion, a face-to-face discussion with someone, and like you're trying to talk about a problem that maybe you have, this model is the one that looks at the 2 elements, the sender and the receiver, as an equal kind of thing. Now, because feedback is immediate, noise is reduced because you can clarify. Like if you're sending a text, sometimes you don't go, okay, what did you mean by that? But if you're face-to-face, you're like, well, wait, what is that supposed to mean? So you see that feedback as the sender, and if you understand that they didn't get your real message, like if I say something and the person's like, well, what do you mean by that? And I can see they're getting angry or upset, and that's not what I meant. I'm like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. Let me restate it. So that clarification process is part of that immediate feedback. And so it changes that dialogue, it changes that communication model because you can react to what you're seeing, what you're getting back, that immediate feedback. Okay, here's the interactive model, the Wesley and McLean model. This one, it looks complicated, I know, but it's really not as complicated as what it looks like. So let's take a look at it. Getting a drink of water, hold on. Okay, this one also embraces the idea of feedback in communication, but it also emphasizes the important role of environment and culture when you're influencing communication, like how your environment around you, like what's going on around you, your family, your friends, where you grow up, like your town, your country, that kind of thing. And cultural factors, like, maybe religious culture or, country of origin, something like that. Those things influence communication. And I gave you that example in class when we were talking about like time and emotion with those values. So those things show that the things we say and communicate are influenced by who we are, what our background is, and what perspective we have going into that, approaching the issue from. This model takes into account the object of orientation, which is the background, the culture, the belief system that you have, and that is of the sender. And then also takes into consideration the background, the culture, and the beliefs of the receiver. And is there a breakdown because of that? It also considers that the message has to be received and sent within a broader social context that needs to be considered in order to understand the message. So you have to think of not just that moment in time when we're looking about culture and belief systems. We have to think about the broader outlook of like what the whole set of people or the whole community or the whole county or the whole state or the whole whatever it is, the whole church, the whole group that you belong to. So that's when we're taking in that social context. So this one would really play into like a political belief system, because your environmental orientation would really play into that communication. Okay, so this one, it's a little bit easier to understand here, even though it's kind of convoluted still. So you can see over here, if you still have your sender, you have your receiver, but here we've got this C, and this is a new word for us. This is gatekeeper. So gatekeeper, you really have to consider, because somebody's sending a message, somebody's getting a message, but how is it coming through? If you've ever had somebody tell you something that someone else said, you know that there can be an issue here. If they get it wrong, if they miscommunicate it, if they make it sound like, there's like a bigger deal, like it's more dramatic or something, then this gatekeeper can change how that receiver gets the message. Now, sometimes, like let's think of politics for a second. The gatekeeper is that editor of information, such as a newspaper editor or a news station. So if we're getting the same information, if we've got this message here that we're getting from our former President Trump, for example, we get this here. That's the message we're getting. That's the sender. Okay, the gatekeeper would be Fox News, it'd be CNN, it'd be MSNBC, it'd be all these different gatekeepers. And then the audience is the regular public that's getting that message. This factor right here, this gatekeeper factor, is going to influence that message. It's going to change that message just slightly enough to influence how that receiver takes that message. Okay, so these X factors over here, those are the things that come into play when we're talking about the sender and the receiver. Okay, so this is the first one up here is the sensory experience. That's the way we get it, how we, what our sensory experiences is in the way we receive the message. It shapes the context of our message, so how we perceive that sensory experience. Okay, now this one, this X2, which is right here, and this can be many different things. Okay, this X2 right here, this is the object of orientation with the sender, the beliefs, the culture, the background. And over here, we get the object of orientation of the receiver. So this can be like biases. It can be things that we already come into it with. It can be the things that we already know or that we don't know, those things. And then we pass that on. All right. Now, no, it's not the last one. I thought it was. The next one, which is a transactional model, again, looks a little bit confusing, but it's really not that bad. That is Barnland's transactional model. And here's our visual. And it kind of gives you an idea, even though it's kind of weird to understand this. We kind of have the idea of the person that is doing the decoding and the encoding. So if we've got the person right here is the person sending the message, and then there's the decoding process and the encoding. So the person encodes, this person decodes, and it goes back again. Now over here, what we have are public and private cues. These are the things that we're told when we get the message, like, oh, did you hear what she said right there? Okay, I think what she meant by that was. So that would be a public cue. Private cue would be something that you hear about, like that not everybody knows that you've heard or that you know. Okay, we also get nonverbal and behavioral cues with this model. Like we take into consideration the tone of voice and the body language, things like that. Okay, so now this one is one that explores like an interpersonal, immediate feedback communication. So we're talking about same time, same feedback that we were talking about before, an immediate feedback. Central to this approach is the idea that feedback for the sender is the reply to the receiver. Let me say that again because I think I said it wrong. That feedback for the sender is the reply for the receiver. No, I said it right. Okay, so when you send a message, that feedback you get back, that's a reply. That's an answer to whatever you said or whatever you communicated. This model also highlights the idea of those cues I was just talking about and how those impact the message that we get. Barnland highlights the role of public cues, which are the environmental cues, like what's our town believe, what's our country believe, what's our friends believe, what's our family believe, and private cues, which is like your personal thoughts and background that you come into that with. With this emphasis on cues, this Barnland model highlights the factors that influence what we think and say. So it's about what we know and what cues we're getting and like how we interpret that message, whether that's what's meant or not. That has to do with those cues and those things that we bring into, and it has a lot to do with bias and background. Okay, this is just what the last model, I think. No, it's not the last model, but this is, I keep thinking we're done. We're not, sorry. But this is one that I thought was interesting because in this model, you can see the worldviews that we talked about and how those worldviews are those private cues, are those things we come into it with, and how it does change our message that we send and change the way we receive that message. So you can see how that's been put in there. Okay, last one, I promise. This is also a transactional model. This one is called Dance's helical model. And what this one is, even though it's like really weird to look at, you've got this basic idea of this spiral shape, and it depicts communication as starting off down here, like very small. So somebody says something, send a message, and then it's like this endless spiral of communication. So like the feedback, and then the next person, like I say something, then you say something back, and I interpret that, and then you interpret what I just said in your interpretation. And it just keeps looping on and getting bigger, because the more messages we get, the more we have feelings about that message. There's more possibility for noise. There's more possibility for bias. There's more possibility for feedback. So a lot of things come into play, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, now re-saying that. It builds on the idea that there's a circular model by explaining how we improve our messages over time by using feedback. When we communicate with others, their feedback influences our next statement, or at least it should. If it doesn't, then you're kind of socially, and you've probably known people who don't pick up on clues. They just don't pick up on social clues. But in order to be a good communicator, it's really pretty important that you pick up on those social cues. The more we become knowledgeable about the cycle of communication, the more information we have, the more we're able to expand that circle, then the more we have to bring to the table as far as dialogue and communication is. So that movement, like I said, indicates that each communication practice is new and different from the previous because you add more to it. So each one of these, even though they're connected, is kind of a new communication because you add something to it. Okay? And communication never, ever really perfectly repeats itself. Even if you have like a class that the teacher teaches the next class the same lesson, it's never going to be the exact same because the feedback isn't the same. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so that is your assignment. I'm going to put that on here, the link to the Edpuzzle, and then you are going to go back. If I can make this work. Oh, here we go. You're going to go in and you're going to do the Quizlets on these, and here are the links for each class period. So make sure you go on and do the Quizlet. So you've listened to my example. I'm going to put a link here, and then you're going to go to Quizlet and you're going to do that set. And you're going to do, let me type it in here in case you didn't know. I'll type it in. You're going to do flashcards, learn, match, test, and write. All right. Okay, worth 20 points. That should be everything. So let me know if you have a question, email me. See you later.